I'm head of technical services at EMBL EBI. EMBL, the European Molecular Bioinformatics Laboratory, is the equivalent of CERN, but for life sciences. We're an international treaty organisation. We have 20 plus member states in Europe that support our activities, and we have a range of outstations. Our headquarters are in Heidelberg, up in the mountains, and Hinxton, which is where I'm from, near Cambridge, is the centre within EMBL that focuses on the support of the bioinformatics, the basically storage of the large amounts of data, life science data that come up from the community. So I'm going to talk about interoperable infrastructures in the life sciences, and especially what we're doing around cloud and some of the challenges that we have around cloud because of the large data sets that we support. So what all of us are doing in science is trying to convert data to information to gain knowledge. So for us, we have large amounts of molecular data, either around genetics, around the behaviour of molecules. From that, we want to pull together information such as where proteins come from, which part of the genome comes from, produce which proteins do we see coming from different genomes, be it humans, be it mice, be it whatever. And from that to come up with links as to how diseases are driven by the different proteins which come from the different genetic profiles, and obviously then to try and disrupt those pathways to lead to better and improved health outcomes. So in Europe, EBI has the community lead in bringing together this data and supporting this function. We work internationally. A third of the human genome was originally sequenced on the Wellcome Trust site, which is where we're based, but at the Sanger building. We ended up storing it, and with colleagues in Japan and in the US, we exchange these sequences continuously so that there are free replicated versions of these databases available for others to use. So the biggest challenge we have is data size. Okay, so compared to the wonderful colleagues in high-energy physics, life science has got two major differences. The first thing is we do not have a single data source, i.e. the LHC at CERN producing data. Thanks to the wonders of sequencing technology, data can be produced almost anywhere now. Most hospitals, most research labs have not only one but several sequencing machines, and from that they can generate gigabytes of data over each sequence, and that builds rapidly up to terabytes of data throughout the year. There are thousands of these sequencing machines across Europe, so there's a lot of genetic data being generated. And this explains why we have a large number of the data sets that we hold. We have many different types of data, and some of these are doubling as slowly as every 12 months. Others are doubling on a 3-monthly basis, but luckily a couple of orders of magnitude less than some of the data sets that we have at the moment. So one of the challenges we face is how do we carry on bringing this data together, depositing it into one place, and running the various pipelines we have to extract information out of these data. So to support that, we have a number of data resources that we provide. This is where we collect data together. People go through a submission process to submit those sequences to us, and we then make those available for people to download individually or in bulk to their own resources. We provide some services where you can analyse that data on where we have it, and this saves you having to download that to your own site. But clearly, with the data size doubling of the major data sets each year, we have to keep ramping up our storage capacity and also the analysis capacity we have around that. So every now and again I get people to come up with projections to how far things are going to look in the future. This focuses just on money, not on hardware. But you can see our capital investment needs to go up from where we are at the moment, about 4.5 million a year, to around over 9 million a year over the next 5 years to keep pace with our data growth. And at the end, in around about 2020, effectively we'll have a 2 exabyte data center with just under 250,000 cores of compute power to provide the scale up the analysis capacity we have at the moment. So this is a very challenging infrastructure thing to do, yes.
So in a very similar way to which CERN is effectively budget capped by what the member countries are willing to provide, how realistic is your budget increase, bearing in mind the very significant investments at the national scale?
So the budget for hardware, we are very lucky to be the recipient of a DBSRC Large Facilities Capital Fund grant, which is a UK Research Council, which effectively takes us up to that sort of point. Clearly the concern is what happens after that. That is around about 20% of so that's 20% of EBI's income, of which a third of EBI's income comes from external grant sources. So if you're looking at the money that we get as part of being part of Enable, that's around about 30% of the budget. Okay. So, yeah, let's not think about that. So the challenge really is how to provide this sort of access. So, as I mentioned, the data generation is distributed as opposed to other use cases. A lot of the analysis is based around centrally run algorithms, so having all of that data in one place to do all of the analysis around it. And we already know that to provide more information and knowledge based around this data, we need to better integrate the data at a, let's call it semantic level. So this is better data interchange between the researchers within the community, and there's various projects that are looking to tackle that already. But how can we generate and establish the data infrastructure to sustain the collection of this data is really the big challenge. So the model we have at the moment is very centralized. The model that we're exploring whether we can move to is much more distributed. And in this distributed model, we're assuming that the centre can't take as much of the data anymore, so the data has to stay where it is generated. But also that the centre is not necessarily going to have all of the computational capacity. So not only does the data need to stay where it's generated, but there needs to be compute available with that data to enable people to go off and do that analysis and then bring the results of that analysis together. So this poses many challenges. Obviously we need good networks. We need to be able to move the compute from one location into the other locations. And we need a lot more ability to do that in a transparent and also a secure and coordinated manner. So at EBI, we've been exploring some of these issues around what we call our embassy cloud. This sits next to our data center and is an infrastructure as a service offering based upon VMware, where people in the community can bring along their virtual machines, deploy those virtual machines into our cloud infrastructure, and then those virtual machines can be made to effectively mount our data stores into those virtual machines. So there's a very fast network link between those virtual machines and the data, and there's no need for them to copy the data out into the virtual machines, into their own clouds, or anything like that. And we see this as a model that helps drive through a lot of the infrastructure issues that some of our research collaborators are finding. It's taking a long time to download our data sets locally onto their infrastructure at their research institute. Their research institute's infrastructure needs to scale to manage both the data and the volume of compute necessary around that data. And this is an alternative model that stops that need to happen. So in concept, what we have within our cloud infrastructure is our public data. Our public services that we run already within our data centers are also virtualized and sit quite close to where the cloud is located. And we also have a set of data called managed data. Managed data is data that is not public. It's being collected under certain ethical labels as part of clinical studies. And access to that data is controlled by data access committees where researchers need to go through peer review approval in order to be able to access those particular data. And that might relate to the collection of genomes from individuals who've got a particular type of cancer, and they will have given consent for that to be used to support particular types of research activities. Partly because the managed data is partly because not only with that genome is there also information about the patients as well, as to their health condition and treatment options in effect. So into that infrastructure you can deploy your own clouds which can be connected through to these datas, and this is where collaborators will put their virtual machines to do their analysis. And also you can bring together not only your own computational environment but also your own data into that space as well, and that's being linked up as part of international collaborations such as the pan-cancer analysis. So what does this mean in the future? Well, the future, we're probably going to move away from this very, so the current state of the art at the moment is there's a big EBI data center with virtualized infrastructure upon which we run our services. Okay? This at the moment all exists sort of in-house in our own lease space. But in the future, you can see us making more use of external cloud providers. So, should we have a relationship with the Microsoft Azures, the Amazons, to take cloud infrastructure from them that allows us to elastically expand to make use of other people's infrastructures as well as just our own to manage our own internal load. That in a sense is quite easy because that's all under one control. What becomes more challenging is then how do we deal with that federation aspect? How do we make use of the cloud resources that exist within the community to enable us to put computation into those clouds and to extract data from data providers who may not have their own cloud infrastructure but may sit close to other clouds. Okay? This is where issues around portability and interoperability around the cloud infrastructure, moving data and accessing data start becoming key issues. So with that sort of infrastructure, we can look to run our public services spread across those clouds. So from my perspective, that means that my data center space doesn't need to grow at the same rate as it's growing at the moment. I can start making use of data center space across Europe to manage those growth issues. It also means that we're able to support a greater variety of analysis because people who want to run analysis activities can use their national cloud infrastructures, potentially as well as EBIs or other people's cloud infrastructure, and look to ship the data to the most appropriate location. And that may be the data, if it's a large data set, that data set may be very hard to move, and so the computation needs to come to where that data is. or if the data set is relatively small or a lot of people want to use it because it's popular, then we can move that data set to where there's a cloud resource. But what's missing out of all of this is something that I would technically call the clever bit. Okay, so something that brings together all of these different aspects of discovery of data, of where the current data location is, moving the data to new locations to make new cloud resources become useful. So this is something that it sort of exists as a gap, certainly a year ago in terms of concept. But over the last year with the start of Elixir, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides, there's been a growth of a discussion of technical services that will enable this to take place. So this is something that is now beginning to coalesce in a project proposal called Accelerate, which goes into the intra-dev pre-call that closes in January. And the purpose of this project proposal is to accelerate the establishment of the Elixir technical services infrastructure. So as part of the Accelerate proposal, there's a set of identified and funded use cases, but this is alongside a whole load of other Elixir and Elixir-related project activities. What we're seeing is that all of these use cases and activities have some sort of workflow. Some have specific workflow engines, such as Galaxy. Others run scripts about starting up virtual machines in cloud spaces. But all of them, again, are focusing more and more upon an infrastructure as a service model for actually undertaking as the analysis environment. And obviously with that infrastructure, there's a need to use either existing data archives or to move data to places where that compute can be co-located with that data for the purposes of analysis. So again, there's a need for a clever bit in between. After a year of soul searching, we now have a name for that clever bit. That clever bit is a research platform for life science. You see, we've been really putting our thinking caps on this thought. And what we see then as the research platform for life sciences is a set of core enabling services that bring together the infrastructure that's available with the needs of the end user scientists. So the infrastructure bits that we have on the table, certainly within the cloud space, are the EGI Federated Cloud, Géant, which is bringing together not only its national cloud providers, but also commercial cloud providers, and also the Elixir nodes themselves that either have their own cloud infrastructure or work with national cloud providers as well. So within that, there's a classic authentication authorization piece linked through to a identifier that's very popular in the life sciences community for identifying individual researchers, ORCIDs. There's again a classic piece of a service catalogue and the means to look at the usage around that service catalogue. So you have the various services advertising themselves, they become discoverable, and as individuals, identified individuals come along and use those services, the use of those services by that individual is recorded there so that you can do analysis and statistics around what happens. And then final bit in there is the issue around moving data. So we need to know where data is, because data is a great gravity and attractor for computational activity. And sometimes data is not in the same place as where the computational capacity is, so we need to move it around. So we need some file access and file movement services. And the links and the Accelerate projects is look to integrate many of these existing services around that. So I mentioned data has gravity. So the challenge that we have compared to the simple use cases that exist in high-energy physics is that our data sets need to be of a slightly larger granularity. So you can do something usefully in high-energy physics with a 1 gig or a couple of gig file, You can move that to a site, you can process it for 12, 24 hours, generate some result, you can then register and put that somewhere. Okay? So moving a couple of gigabytes around the network is easy. Okay? Unfortunately, many of the data sets we deal with are in the hundreds of terabytes. Okay? Moving hundreds of terabytes across the network is possible, but it's not something you're going to do on an ad hoc basis. You want to know that you're doing that as part of a plan, and you're doing that to, say, enable cloud capacity, because if you've got a large data set and some cloud capacity alongside it, then you'll be able to attract work to come along and use it. So the clouds need to be able to advertise what space they have, and certainly this is with the Embassy Cloud. Our data is already available, so we don't have to move it. But we're working with partners to say, can we move some of our data sets into alongside your cloud infrastructure, so that that will then bring computation to your cloud space. And obviously, Amazon and Azure are two good commercial targets to do this with, and there's obviously research community cloud providers as well in this. But the key thing is the orchestration, getting the right data in the right cloud, and the integration is at making sure that the workload can run in that cloud and access that data, regardless of that cloud infrastructure or how that data is stored locally beside that cloud. So Elixir is a European-wide activity to try and bring together the individual national activities and intergovernmental activities such as EMBOL to drive and develop this sort of infrastructure to enable a whole range of different life science activities. Elixir is focusing on a whole range of things, but clearly what I've been talking today about is mainly around about the compute infrastructure, the technical services that are able to link the data, the tools people use to allow people to go and do useful science on top of it.
What's the problem? Why is the UK Elixir node somewhere up the north?
Because the
other one's too big to make it fit.
Because the Hingston-based hub is sort of displacing the UK node up the country. It's sort of close to where Oxford is. So why are we doing this? So one of the reasons is to enable things like personalised medicine. So this is a very, so 75% of all cancer drugs are not effective on an individual. Okay? All of these drugs are expensive, and clearly for the individual, it'll be better if the doctor prescribed the right drug that meets your individual genomic makeup, rather than trying, say, 2 or 3 and hoping that eventually they get the right one. This is now becoming possible because you can actually get your genetic sequence and actually use that to help drive diagnostic decisions. But to do this, clearly there are some ethical concerns, because basically you need to take the patient's genetic profile and push that out through some sort of analysis platform to come up with an answer. And you need to think about where is that sequence going, who is seeing that at a computational level. So the UK has something called the Genomics England that's going to sequence 100,000 people across the UK through the NHS, the National Health Service, to identify around extreme diseases. I'm not sure extreme is the right phrase, but certainly rare diseases. Thank you, that's the word I was after. Rare diseases, and to bring that data together, and then to make that data available in an anonymised fashion for researchers to come and extract out information around it. And what will be the value around this is that genetic information will also be linked to the person's individual medical records. So in the future, there's a workflow where your individual data is merged with data from a whole larger cohort, and so you can start seeing, okay, this is an individual's genetic makeup, this matches the makeup of individuals within this study, and you can then see what was the impact of drugs for those individuals that match you in terms of the outcome. And this helps provide a report that informs the physician as to what drug to give you and so forth. And this obviously has got a great ability to not only impact the outcome of the individual, but for all of these very expensive cancer drugs, instead of wasting 75% of them, you can actually direct the 25% work to a particular individual and save a lot of money also in the process. So the data infrastructure needs to do with transnational sources, large number of them producing lots of data, and also potentially medical data. So again, not wanting to pick on my particle physics colleagues, it's easy to move your particle physics data from one country to another, because the only people that care about it possibly are particle physicists. Okay? Medical data is regulated. Medical data, it is rare to be able to move that outside of the hospital environment. If you're lucky, you can move it outside the hospital environment to a data center in the same country. Moving that data out of the country is complex. Moving it out of, say, the European Union would be very, very hard.
Even for research?
If it's got patient identifier material in it, yes.
But you don't need it, right? You just
Well,
need data.
You can have the data, but then what is the point of having a whole bunch of genetic data if you don't know anything about the individual whose data that's related to?
You can keep it anonymous, but you just keep the specification of.
It's not quite as simple as if you need to have a lot of it, even with anonymized data. People that was given under ethical parameters, and those ethical parameters need to be assured to be respected. So it is possible, but there are strings attached to it, which makes it complicated. So again, there's the issue of encapsulating the compute with the data around that, and to coordinate the compute and data infrastructure. So AI, data, and cloud are three of the key areas that we're focusing on within Elixir to provide that. And what we've learned from this, and also from elsewhere, again, high-energy physics, single data source, and only 4 groups really trying to consume that data. Elixir has got over 10 research infrastructures, the sort of the equivalent to the high-energy physics experiment. And it hasn't got one data source, it's got thousands of data sources. So again, the whole management and coordination of that is a lot more complex. And so the Embassy Cloud has provided an infrastructure, a blueprint in the community is one way of doing that. And what we now need to see is how to replicate that model elsewhere. So this notion of having large data and bringing your computer onto it is supported, but also then how to federate both that cloud capacity and that data capacity so that this becomes something that isn't tied to particular instances, but can be much more portable around the European environment. And this is where obviously work such as interoperability starts having an impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.